CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, how you design an individual page. So the HTML is that structure, and the CSS is the design elements. We can think about it in this way. The HTML says there should be an H1 tag on the top of the page. CSS is going to tell you what the font is, what color it is, how big the text should be, how big the border around the text should be, etc. So HTML is structure, CSS is design. And keeping these separate is the best way to handle them. In HTML, you can handle styling really at three levels: style tags, style blocks, and style sheets. And let's see how these three are separated. Here we're back in the HTML we created earlier. Let's say that we want to take our web page as we see it now. We may want to make it look a little better. Let's start with just changing the font. We can come here into the body and add a style property. And this is where we can give it properties to change the look and feel of the body element itself. So I'm going to add a font family of sans serif. And that just means I want to have a font that doesn't have the little serifs on them. Times New Roman has serifs, Arial doesn't, Helvetica doesn't, but Georgia does. So it's just a stylistic decision about what I want my page to look like. I could put individual fonts here, but it's ultimately going to try to match it as best it can on a particular machine. So typically you're not going to want to put OS-specific font names here, like Arial. And I'll also set the font size as the default for the page to be 14 pixels. Now this is a relative size based on pixels for a web page. And I've put these in a style tag, and so it'll affect the body and anyone who hasn't specifically set one of these properties on its own, which in our case is no one. When we refresh it, we'll see that it changed a little in that now it found a font that passes muster as a sans serif font, and that all the elements then get or inherit that property because it exists on body, their parent. The problem with this approach is it doesn't scale very well. Having a style element on each piece that you want to change the look of ends up being pretty ugly. So one alternative is to create a style tag. So instead of putting the style element direct here in body, we can use something called a CSS selector. This is a description for what we want to apply some rules to. And in our case, it's just going to be body. Any kind of element on an HTML page can be matched simply by using its name. So here we'll put body to say, please specify any element that is called body, normally only one, and then specify the font family and font size in the same language we did in the style tag. Now this works. This is fine if all of your styling is only on a particular page. But the reality is in most cases you're going to want to separate these into their own file so that they can be shared amongst different pages in your web application. So let's do that. Let's create a new folder under www.root called CSS, and this, you could call this style sheets, you could call this whatever you'd like, but see, calling it CSS is a pretty common way. And then let's create a new file, and I'm going to call it site.css. And let's just take this style, instead of having it on the top of the page as a style, we'll have it in a separate file called site.css. I'll put a comment at the top so we can always know what file we have open. In order to link it here, we actually need to create something called a link and tell it that its type using the rel as a style sheet, and then an href to point at the actual file. This is effectively telling it to link our style sheet into the page. So when the page is loaded, it's going to see this style sheet and also load it from the server and apply it to our page. If we refresh, we should still get the same page, but we're getting it from a separate request. And the separate request is important because ultimately you're probably going to have more than one page on your particular website, and separating these out so you can share it across those pages makes the most sense in almost every situation. Inline styles for one-offs, maybe you can get away with. Putting style sections in the header, maybe you can get away with. But in most cases, go ahead and create separate style sheet files for each of the different kinds of things you want to do. In our case, most of our styles will be in this site CSS in one large set of rules. So let's explore CSS selectors so you can really understand what they're supposed to do.